despite my innocence. I'm going to settle some scores. Lydia was busy. She was working for the prosecutor as his secretary assistant, a job Peter had organized. She had managed to survive the whole thing because she had stopped seeing Peter shortly before he went to prison. She felt some guilt towards Isaac, but if Isaac had just given up since she had sworn an oath in court, there was no turning back, and she had already paid a heavy price for that. Her daughter barely spoke to her because of that, and also because they manipulated her into cooperating. She was just finishing the letter when the prosecutor and the woman entered the office. "Lydia, could you come into my office for a moment?" As she entered the prosecutor's office, the woman said, "Please close the door and have a seat." On the large television screen set up in front of them, the woman identified herself as Agent Smith of the FBI and showed her identification. She sat down and said, "We are reopening the Isaac Manor case." Lydia turned pale. A lead ball began to form in her stomach. "And this is necessary, why?" Agent Smith continued. "I think you know why we're here, don't you?" "No, why?" a very nervous Lydia asked. "I'll show you some examples of why," Agent Smith replied dryly, and the large screen lit up. Lydia saw herself sitting with Peter Rams and heard herself working out a plan to frame Isaac. She lost consciousness. When she regained consciousness, there was a loud noise. Opening her eyes, she saw that she was lying on the floor. A few feet away from her, the prosecutor was wrestling with two stout men who were handcuffing him and losing badly to them. With contempt in her eyes, Agent Smith said to him, "You think you're going to get away with this? Or this judge and this probation officer? We have months of footage, including a conspiracy to destroy that you all attended, and it's all perfectly legal because the recording was made in the house, and the owner is the one who gave it to us." A week later, Lydia confessed. Ramsday was visited in his cell and formally charged with crimes sufficient to put him behind bars for more than the rest of his life. Isaac learned that Lydia had been sentenced for making a false statement to the police and perjury. He calmly made it clear that he would ignore anything that might happen to his ex-daughter-in-law. He is being sued for $1 million for each year Isaac was in jail and for damages to his home and neighborhood. A lawsuit will also be filed against the city of Denz for compensation for participating in his wrongful imprisonment. City officials were very quick to go along with the settlement. Ramsday, with his exorbitant ego, thought the lawsuit would be a nullity. His lawyer did his job, but spent as little energy on it as possible. He was fed up with the former sheriff's demands. Eventually, the court decided that Isaac's claim was valid, and the sheriff did lose his fortune. It helped that the money was going into Isaac and Ben's Betkin Investments Trust Fund. Lydia was really scared to death of Isaac's lawsuit. She was in jail, she no longer had a job, her house would be foreclosed on because she would no longer be able to pay her mortgage, and where would she find $550,000? She wasn't abused or mistreated in prison. In some ways, it was even worse. Her cellmates completely ignored her. They turned away when she tried to speak. She had her own cell because no one wanted to be in her neighborhood and preferred to sleep on the ground elsewhere. Lydia heard talk of an investment program, and when she asked what it was, one of the guards cynically said that many prisoners owed her for dragging her ex-husband into prison, otherwise, the ISKCON funds would never have been established. In her misery, she forgot this again shortly thereafter. Ramsey had a fit when he learned that Isaac had been sued for $5.5 million and another $500,000 for repairs. He screamed that he would kill Isaac and send the two women to a Russian brothel. Shortly after that night, he had visitors again. This time, they were not so affectionate, and Ramsey continued to scream, but now in pain. Isaac had been out of prison for a year. K2 had joined him in the free world, and they had become fast friends. Isaac's house had been completely renovated and had regained its former glory, however, its decorations were still minimal. Meanwhile, he silently bought up every house that came up for sale in the cul-de-sac. That night, he went to bed, but after a few minutes, he had to close the window because of the terrible storm that had broken over the land. He looked out, shook his head, and looked out again. He saw Laura and Tim huddled in the doorway, soaking wet and shivering. He was angry. He grabbed the 2 raincoats the workers sometimes used and ran downstairs, ignoring the fact that he himself was soaked. "What are you thinking of?" he shouted. "You're catching your death. Put this on and come up to the house." Laura seemed about to refuse, but glancing at Isaac changed her mind. When they reached Isaac's house safely, she looked guiltily at the ground and said quietly, "I'm sorry, I panicked and wasn't thinking." Isaac immediately diffused the situation and replied softly, "I'm sorry I yelled. That's what worrying about people does to me." "What happened? The fuse box blew?" "Good, I'll have someone take a look at it tomorrow. You can stay here tonight. I'll change the sheets on the bed, and you and Tim can sleep there. I'll sleep on the bed tonight. Tomorrow, we'll look around your house, and please, no arguments." Isaac found some t-shirts, showed Laura to the bathroom, and told her and Tim to take a hot shower. He took his bed into the study to rest. Suddenly, he heard a quiet sound. Turning around, he saw Laura standing in the doorway. To hide his embarrassment, he asked a little gruffly, "Is there anything you need that I can help you with?" "Yes, you're a big dummy." "I need to thank you," said Laura, blushing. She kissed Isaac gently on the cheek and asked, "Why on earth would your ex dump you, and also in the way she did?" "I have no idea. Anyway, I left her behind knowing she was behind bars." Isaac stood up and said, "I'm ready to tell you the reading version." Isaac told her how he had designed and installed redundant security systems as a hobby and hid them so well that criminals couldn't find them. The outside system was accessible via the internet. That's what happened at the jail and was the demise of the merchants and the sheriff. The other system was hidden in the house and inaccessible to Isaac, and frankly, he expected it to be destroyed and didn't think much of it until he saw his office was virtually untouched and only used as a dumping ground. On the hard drives, he found, among other things, evidence of my innocence. He concluded, finished, and sent Laura to bed. Tomorrow was going to be a busy day. The next morning, a contractor came in to inspect the damage to Laura's house. K2 came with him, and Isaac introduced Laura to Fabian. Her small hand was completely hidden in his large paw. Timothy came in next, and they shook hands as well. Fabian tucked his knees up and said, "Careful, that hurt. You're stronger than you think." The ice was broken. They went to the house for coffee, where Fabian whispered to Laura, "Don't drink his coffee without water." Laura giggled back, "I know. I was shocked this morning at what he calls coffee." The contractor returned with bad news. Laura's house was practically uninhabitable due to neglect. Laura began to cry. Isaac got straight to the point. "K2, can you put a lock on my bedroom and give Laura the keys?" He looked at Laura and asked, "Who's your landlord?" "My ex," Laura hiccuped, "and he won't sell it to me." Isaac looked back at K2. "Take care of that too, okay?" "Good. And have it forensically examined before you offer that a price." Laura looked surprised and asked, "Why the lock?" "Because according to the neighbors, I still have a bad attitude toward women." "Until what time do you have to work?" "I don't have to work today. They pay me a pittance and demand 150% on what they pay me. I barely make ends meet, and I can't find another job again because of my ex." "What kind of work do you do?" "I studied organization and business. I specialized in both, and now I'm a secretary in a pool with other secretaries and those willing to provide more services." Isaac pondered as he walked. He really liked this woman who was fighting with all her might for her son, constantly being sabotaged by her ex-husband, and he needed a secretary. The workload was increasing rapidly, and he wanted more free time for himself. So he asked, "I need someone to help me full-time. The workload is growing over my head, and if I don't keep up with it, I will become a prisoner of my own trust. Would you be willing to work for me here in this house, or even from your own home when it's renovated?" Laura blushed and felt warm. Stammering, she replied, "I don't have any references, and I need to be able to take care of Timothy." Sensing Laura's agony, he gave her another nudge. "If you work in this house, I'll set aside a room for Tim." He'll have his own little office, and I'll help him with his homework when needed. Isaac waited a moment and said softly, "Go ahead, make a move. It will free you up, and it will be good for me too. I'll be working with someone I already know and like." "You like me?" asked Laura, very surprised. "Why else would I care about you so much if you were just a neighbor? You'd get a room at a long-stay hotel. Now please say yes. Anna and Ben will decide the details with you." Laura jumped into Isaac's arms, wrapped her arms around him, and kissed his cheek. "When do I start?" she asked eagerly. "Now. I suddenly feel like decorating the house and doing lots of other things. I hope you'll be staying here while the house is being remodeled." "Yes, and Timothy will be happy too, but I need to quit my old job first. Can I use your phone meanwhile?" Timothy had discovered an old robot that Isaac had made as a hobby. It was one of the few intact things they had found in the house. He ran over to Isaac with it in his hands. "Tim," exclaimed, "what is this? Who built this?" Isaac smiled happily at the boy, replying, "I did. Let's find batteries and a remote control, and you can play outside with it." 10 minutes later, the little robot, accompanied by the joyful shouts of an 11-year-old boy, pulled into the driveway. Along the way, Isaac arranged a babysitter for Tim, and an hour later, he and Laura were on their way to a large shopping center. "I quit my job. They weren't happy and offered me a raise and more work," Laura said. "Ha," Isaac replied, pulling out into the parking lot. "I hope it's too little and too late. What are they offering?" Laura looked at the man beside her and noticed a glimmer of apprehension on his face. She thought, "Does he really care?" She felt herself getting warm and, for a very long time, involuntarily a little moist in a very different place than her mouth. Laura decided to tease him a little and asked, "What do you have to offer?" Isaac didn't miss a beat. $4,000 a month, clean for starters, free rent, and my undying gratitude." "Deal," exclaimed Laura cheerfully. "But free rent? You haven't got a house yet. Don't underestimate Fabian's negotiating skills. And no, he will really ask nicely." 2 weeks later, Laura was amazed at how fast and efficient the ex-con crews were. She was already moving some of her belongings back into her now rent-free home, but she did so with some sadness. Laura was growing more and more attached to this sometimes gloomy man. Their working relationship was firmly established. The day began with an hour-long cardio and fitness workout. It was a regimen Isaac had adopted in prison under Fabian's guidance, and as a result, he had become a very fit man and wanted to keep it that way. Laura had struggled with the workouts at first, but she had already noticed a difference in her condition. The work she found was challenging at times, but like the workouts, she was learning to cope with it as well. A few nights later, Tim announced that he had a new math teacher. Laura didn't pay much attention to it, only half listening to her son's happy chatter. She was thinking about Isaac and whether there was any way to show her feelings for him when she noticed the car in her driveway. She wasn't expecting visitors and watched it for a few moments. The driver didn't get out, but then her attention was caught by Timothy, who was enthusiastically talking about how he was building his own robot with Isaac's help, of course. Half an hour later, she looked out again and saw that the car was still standing there, and the driver was still sitting in it. Wondering why this was so, she went in search of it, walked up to the driver's side, and knocked on the window. Thomasina Manor, aka Tommy, had gotten a job as a math teacher at a school in the neighborhood where she used to live when her mother was sentenced to prison, also for perjury. Tommy had to stop studying artificial intelligence and get a job there. She heard Tim talking enthusiastically about building a robot and felt a prick of jealousy. She used to do it with her father before her mother went crazy and got involved with the creep. Later, when she was writing invitations to parent-teacher conferences, she found Tim's address, and her world went downhill. Could it be my dad is helping Tim? Did my dad go back to that house after everything that had happened there? She had to find out. An hour later, she was sitting in the car with a small pair of binoculars, watching. My dad sitting in front of his house. She was shocked at how much older he looked compared to the morning she had left for school and said goodbye to him for the last time. She couldn't hold back her tears, but she was afraid to go near him. One day, her mother wrote Isaac a letter right after his release to ask for his forgiveness and to ask if they could be friends in the future. Isaac's reply came through his lawyer to her lawyer, "Only if you give me back 5.5 years of my life. Otherwise, stay away." Suddenly, there was a knock on the window. Tommy was brought out of her Y and tearfully rolled down the window. The woman looked at her and said, "You're certainly not all right. Come inside to calm down a bit. You can't drive now." Tommy, losing her balance for a moment, allowed the woman to lead her inside. There, she was met by Tim. "Hello, Miss Tommy. Why have you come to visit us?" Laura was taken aback but kept her composure. "I'm Laura Wad, and you are?" "Thomasina Manor. I teach Tim math at school. Please call me Tommy." A light bulb went on in Laura's head. "Manor? You mean?" Tommy nodded and replied sadly, "Yes, my father. I haven't seen him in over 6 years," and slowly sank to the floor. Laura picked her up and sat her down on the couch. She told Tim to get some water and then added, "Tim, please go to your room so we can talk." Tim obeyed immediately, and Laura turned to Tommy. "We need to talk, but first, you are in no condition to drive, so you're going to stay here tonight. If there's one thing I learned from your father, it's to help when help is needed." Tommy breathed a sigh of relief. She finally had someone to talk to, albeit a stranger. She looked questioningly at Laura, and Laura understood her question. She said, "I know almost everything. The only thing your father never mentioned was your part in the affair, only that you were adopted by Peter Ramsey." Tommy shook her head vehemently and replied, "I was never adopted." Corrected version. I refused, and eventually, they gave up. When I realized what they did to my father, I stopped talking to my mother. I left that house when I turned 18, I couldn't call it home anymore. Shortly after that, my mother and Laura separated. Laura had to digest this information. Isaac was convinced his daughter was adopted. After a while, she said, "I think we have to find a way to convince your father to let you back into his life. I want him to be as happy as possible. He still has a picture of you in his desk drawer, you know." The tone with which Laura made her little speech made Tommy look at her closely and realize the truth. She touched Laura's hand and said softly, "We have known each other only a short time, but one thing is obvious to me, you love him, don't you?" A depressed Laura blushed and with sadness in her voice replied, "Yes, but I don't know if I have any chance with him. Maybe I can help you if I tell you what I know about my dad from my own experience and from what my mom told me before she got brain damaged by that sheriff." "What do you mean?" "My mom told me once that underneath that shell and shine is a very shy man who doesn't want to impose himself on a woman in any way. The more he likes her or loves her, the more he keeps his distance." Laura suddenly perked up. "Really? He's attentive. Do you suddenly find flowers on your desk? Tim tells me you've been shopping, you looked at something you liked in the store, and suddenly it was delivered the next day." Laura could only confirm all of this. "He loves you, don't worry. My mother also told me that she had to catch up with him quite aggressively. Please take care of my father, I desperately want him to be happy. I want to see him so badly I can taste it, but I don't have those 5 years for him." That was his demand. "When can you give me my 5 years back?" Tommy's tears threatened to spill over again. Laura was having a very bad night after a very emotional evening. A stranger had slept in her house and told her how the man she had fallen in love with was structured. Now that she understood a little of how Isaac was structured, she needed to find a way to break through his shield. She tried to devise a plan, coming up with a few scenarios, but just as quickly discarded them. Eventually, she decided to start dressing more provocatively. How she wanted to reunite father and daughter was not an option at the moment. Isaac was already working out when Laura walked into his small gym. He was pleasantly surprised looking at her. She was wearing her usual sweatpants, but the loose t-shirt had been replaced by a tight top showing off her cleavage. Watching her more closely, he noticed that she was starting to tighten up and had lost a little weight. Halfway through the workout, Laura decided to put Tommy's assertion to the test. So she asked Isaac, "Can I have the day off? We're working our asses off, I need to relax a little and I need some new clothes. So I'd like to go shopping today. Tim's at school until 5. Isaac exclaimed enthusiastically, "That's a great idea. Do you mind if I join you? I want to spend the day away from the office too." That was exactly what Laura wanted to hear, but she pretended to mull it over. She noticed that the expression on Isaac's face immediately changed from pleased to somewhat concerned and quickly replied, "I'd like that very much, some friendly company. You can help me choose." "Are you sure? I won't take offense if you want to go alone. I'm also your employer after all," Isaac said, giving her a way out. "Yes, you are, but you're also a dear friend," she replied and kissed him lightly on the cheek. "But there's one hard rule, H." "What rule?" "No talking about work," Laura replied with a slight smirk, seeing Isaac smile. Laura thought, mission accomplished. "Yes, boss," joked Isaac. An hour later, the three of them were on the car ride, first to Tim's school and after dropping Tim off to the mall. They arrived early, so Isaac and Laura took their time drinking coffee before going shopping. For Isaac, Laura firmly told him that he should get rid of his convict image and start wearing clothes that would present him in a better light. After Isaac was secured, Laura began to have fun. She got rid of what she called Mama's fat. Also, since she didn't have to worry so much about how to get through the week financially, she became more confident and relaxed. Turning sideways, she admired her new look in the fitting room mirror and smiled. She found the other dress very pretty, but it was beyond her budget. Sighing, she returned it to the rack. She then went to the sportswear department and completely missed Isaac's gesture to the saleswoman. After lunch, they had a friendly argument about who would pay the bill. Of course, Laura lost. As they walked back to the car laden with bags and boxes, Laura never noticed the extra bag between the rest of their purchases, along with a bottle of her favorite perfume. At home, Laura unpacked and discovered the purchased items. Tommy had hit the mark. She felt herself getting warm. "I really have a chance," she thought. The next day, she went to the gym wearing another top. By the third day, she was getting desperate. By the end of her workout, her eyes filled with red tears. Isaac, taking one look at her face, was immediately at her side and asked, "What's the matter, Laura? You're crying. Is there anything I can do to help?" In for a penny, in for a pound, Laura thought. "I have a problem with a man." "What is it? Is he hurting you?" "In a way. The problem is that I love him. I love him, and I'm actually in love with him." Laura saw Isaac swallow and turn pale, but continued, "The thing is, he's not responding to my advances. Now, I don't know what to do. Do you have any ideas?" Isaac stammered, "Laura, you've come to the wrong place for advice, but I'll give it a try. If this man is so dumb-headed, knock him on the head. He would be extremely stupid if he ignores you. You are smart, beautiful, and have a big heart. Be as direct as you can, he'll come to his senses." Isaac and Laura sat on the exercise bench, blushing. She said, "I'm going to be as clear as I can be, Isaac. Are you going to make love to me here or in your bed?" To say Isaac was confused is an understatement. He stammered, "What, you mean me?" "Yes, you. You stupid man, you." "Laura, are you in love with me?" "Really?" Her nod and smile made him smile back as he realized the truth. "Oh, that makes me so happy, Laura. Please believe me, I love you too. I've loved you since you were sitting in bed in the doorway. Then why didn't you tell me, you fool?" "I couldn't. I am your employer, and I am your master, Laura. When I helped you the first time." Here's the corrected and punctuated version of the text. I promise no obligation and no payment, just a friendly face and a cup of coffee once in a while. Is that enough? Remember, sometimes you're too decent for your own good. Now that the problem is solved, the question remains, here or in the bedroom? At the same moment, they ran to the bedroom. Much later, the happy couple were lying on the crumpled bed. They had just taken a nap, and Laura was coaxing Isaac to get up. Isaac, it's time to pick Tim up from school, so one of us needs to go take a shower. I'll shower first and go get Tim. When she pulled up to the school, Tim was already waiting for her in the company of Tommy. She walked over and sent Tim into the car. Tommy smirked slightly and pronounced, "Looks like you got your man. Or is it the other way around? You were just walking around a little funny." Laura laughed out loud and purred, "Thanks for the little bit of information about your father. You were so right." The window of opportunity for Laura opened 6 weeks later. As usual, they practiced in the mornings, but Laura had no energy, and it was noticeable. Isaac began to watch her more closely. Later that morning, she refused a cup of coffee, saying she preferred tea, and when someone walked by with a cheddar sandwich, she had to hurry to the bathroom. Seeing this, Isaac realized he'd had enough. When Laura returned from her surprise visit, he told her he would take the day off because he still needed to visit a client, although the latter was a big white lie. As soon as Laura disappeared into her house, he drove off in his car to a mall where there was a good jeweler. The next morning, Laura felt a little better but excused herself from her workout, citing that a virus had caught up with her. She got a good night's sleep and showed up at her office at 9:30. She expected to see Isaac at his desk, but someone told her he was in the workshop. That was odd. He always goes there in the afternoon, and he didn't even say hello. What's going on here, she thought, and walked over to her desk. On the desk, she found 2 small numbered boxes, numbers 1 and 2. Opening the first one, she found in it a beautiful antique pocket watch with a gold chain. Underneath the watch was a note. She unfolded the paper and read, "Time flies by, and life is too short to waste. The employer is contemplating whether his PA will let him propose to her. He believes that she is beautiful on the outside as well as the inside, and that she will be even more beautiful in the future." Laura felt everything warm inside her. With trembling hands, she opened the second gift. Inside, she found 3 different pregnancy tests. Now she could definitely feel the heat spreading through her body. Pregnant, and Isaac was the first to notice. They had completely forgotten about contraception, she thought warmly. He seemed to accept it readily, maybe even love it. Laura was still confused, and her thoughts were running in circles. Happiness, anxiety, amazement, everything was vying for a place in her mind. She stood there until she heard a quiet cough. Turning around, she saw Isaac standing in the doorway. She blushed again to the depths of her cleavage. She replied modestly, "Yes, my employer is allowed to make the offer." Silently, he took her hand and led her outside. There, in the sunshine, he asked her loud and clear, "Laura, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes, you idiot. You didn't need to ask formally." "I would have said yes anyway," she exclaimed. That's when she realized that about 100 men and women had witnessed this little scene. When he carefully slipped the palladium engagement ring with the emerald-cut diamond on her finger, there were loud cheers and clapping. "My God," she exclaimed, "it's beautiful." Tim approached her with a bottle of champagne and 2 flutes. Isaac said to the bride-to-be, "I've bet on yes, as you can see." Isaac then turned to the others and said, "All present may have a glass in the garden." When the feast was over, Isaac and Laura went to Isaac's house. Laura was tired of all the emotions, congratulations, and handshakes. They made themselves comfortable in the living room and looked out the large window at the forest. After sitting like that silently, enjoying each other's company and touch, Isaac asked, "Where do you want to live? Can you live here, in the ruins of my old life, or should I build us a new house? This house needs serious repairs as it is, especially when you find yourself pregnant. What do you want with your old house?" "That's a lot of questions," Laura replied. "I like this house. It's spacious, roomy, and associated with many happy memories. If I can take part in the renovation, let's stay here, please. As for my old house, it's yours, so why ask me? When Fabian bought it, I decided to put the papers in your name. It's up to you to decide, but I'd hate to involve unknowns. So I'm asking if you know anyone who likes living there. If you want to sell it, I'll just buy it from you, and you'll just have to decide. Isaac smiled. A chance, a big chance, flashed through Laura's mind, but it's an easy one, right now. Isaac would give his consent immediately if I asked him to jump off the cliff. At this moment, he would do it without hesitation. You don't want him to feel manipulated, do you? Her heart raced, but she replied outwardly calmly, I'll have to think about it. Maybe I know someone. The next day, after lunch, Tim was excused from class, and Isaac and Laura decided to have an early lunch, pick Tim up, and head to the park. Isaac talked about what he wanted to change in and around the house. He wanted to add a pool with jets so he could relax or swim properly, and a balcony with a door to the bedroom. He suggested building an attached cabin for Tim first, with a door to the main house and then with its own entrance. There were a few other things, but nothing substantial. When everything was ready, Isaac asked if Laura already had a candidate for her house. Laura nodded affirmatively and took a deep breath. Yes, there is, and I really hate to offer it to you. Can you promise me that you will listen to me first, think about it, and only then answer? Please trust me on this. Isaac immediately felt apprehensive but replied, Yes, I can do that. I will listen first, think first, and promise not to snap. But I suspect I won't like it. Laura replied, I think when you can step over your own shadow, you'll like it and make you very happy. Right now, it's nothing you know. Tim has a new math teacher, don't you? And he really likes her. Isaac only nodded. She desperately needs somewhere to live. The house she's living in now is in foreclosure, and she has to move out within 2 weeks. Isaac asked, and what's the problem? Her name is Thomasina Manor, and I emphasize Manor, not Rams, as you always thought. Isaac sat stunned, mouth open but unable to make a sound. Finally, almost exploding, he asked, What? Laura intervened, You promised. You're right. He muttered. Laura took Isaac's hands, and in a soft voice, began to explain, she never knew what they were doing to you. She thought the makeup artist was working on her portfolio. Her testimony was falsified by Ram every time she went to the authorities to complain and wanted to see you and release you. She was denied because of Ram's. The judge was on Ram's payroll, and before you were sentenced, even your ex-wife thought it was only to force you into submission. As Laura spoke, Isaac's face turned different colors, red, purple, white. And when she finished, he was ashen. She shook his hands and looked at his face and saw tears streaming down his cheeks. Isaac whispered, Poor thing, what do we do now? Confusion reigned in his mind. All he could think was, almost 7 years lost. Laura kissed him gently and lovingly to bring Isaac out of his personal hell. Finally, he snapped back, Rams will pay for this, and it's going to be a very big bill. Don't do anything stupid, please. I don't want the father of our child. Yes, all 3 tests were positive. That was another thing I wanted to tell you. UG, where was I? Oh, the father of our child is back in jail. That's not going to happen. I'm not going to do anything illegal with that bastard. But what are we going to do about Tommy? Leave that to me. Can you get home in an Uber? I can do better than that. The contractor will drive me back. He has to start with a quote for the work on the house. If you agree with them, Laura smiled, your ideas sounded great. I trust you completely. Now, I'm going to go pick up Tim and Tommy. As she pulled up to the school, Tim came running in, and Laura whispered, Can you call Miss Manna? Tim ran off again and returned a few minutes later with Tommy, who looked a little worried. To ease the tension, Laura smiled as happily as she could and purred, I have a house for you. Really, and I can afford it, Laura replied. Oh yes, easily. Hop in, and we'll take a look now. Yes, why not? Tommy made up her mind. She couldn't help but trust this woman and got into the car. Laura drove home. Tommy was puzzled as they pulled up in front of Laura's house. When Tim jumped out of the car to go inside, Laura said, "Here's your new house." Tommy was totally confused. "What the hell? It's your house." "No, I'm getting married, and you can afford it." "Seriously, all you have to do is meet the owner." Tommy was wary. "I'm not going to sleep with him," she shouted. Laura laughed loudly. "No, dear, it wouldn't occur to him." Tommy was still stunned. She asked, "When will I get to meet your mysterious host, and when can I move in?" Laura glared. "Now and tomorrow. For now, we will only need to walk to the house next door. By the way, Tim and I and little Bambino will be living there too." Finally, the quarter fell. Laura took great pleasure in looking at Tommy. Her mouth opened, closed again, and opened only to utter an incomprehensible sound. She went from white to red and was finally able to stammer out, your father?" "Yes, and he really wants to meet you. We're getting married because your younger half-brother or sister is on the way," Laura chirped happily. Tommy experienced a whole gamut of emotions: jubilation at having a suitable place to live, happiness at being able to see her father, and surprise at becoming a big sister. But there was also excitement because she didn't know what to say to her father. In the nearly 7 years he had been gone, she had rehearsed entire speeches and thought up scenarios for their reunion, but now she couldn't think of a single one. Laura took Tommy's hand and gently nudged her toward the house she now called home. In charge, Tim ran ahead and, as usual, knocked loudly on the door. Isaac opened it and said a little nervously, "Hey, big boy, are you alone?" Tim jumped up and replied, "No, Mom is coming with my math teacher. She's going to live in our house." "Really?" Isaac looked at the two women and said, "Wow, what a sight. Two of the most beautiful and important women in my life side by side." When the women appeared on his doorstep, he whispered quietly with a tremor in his voice, "Tommy, you have become such a beautiful woman. Can I give you a hug?" Tommy almost jumped into his arms with a cry, "Daddy." They stood for a long time, savoring the moment, until Laura called them into the house. Once inside, Tommy looked at her father carefully. He had changed a lot. He looked even older than he did through the binoculars. That was to be expected, but he seemed to have aged much more than 7 years. Wrinkles had appeared on his face, especially around his eyes, giving him a melancholy look. She remembered that her father had always seemed a little soft around the waist. Now she noticed that there was no softness at all: skin, muscle, and bone. "Oh, Dad, I'm so sorry," Laura interrupted their tearful reunion. "Perhaps you'd better continue your acquaintance somewhere private while I start dinner. I take it you want to stay for dinner too, Tommy?" Tommy walked over to Laura and hugged her tightly. "Thank you so much. I'm so happy now, and it's all thanks to you, Mom." Laura smiled with wet eyes. "I will do anything to make my Isaac happy. Now, go and talk to Daddy." Isaac and Tommy made themselves comfortable in the living room, where there were comfortable chairs and side tables. In one corner, Isaac offered Tommy a soft drink and said there was no alcohol in prison except what they made themselves. "I never touched it, and when I got out, I figured I could do without it. But I don't mind if the others drink." Tommy nodded, and she replied, "I don't know where to begin." "Are you really offering me Laura's house?" "I can think of a few complications," Isaac laughed softly. "I've thought of that. The only problem that might arise is the restraining order she has against me. I realize she has no place to live when she gets out of jail, and you have plenty of room, Tommy. Listen carefully. This is your home because you are Laura's tenant. And as such, I can't forbid you from having guests, and I won't. But, and this is the only but, your mother must keep her distance from me. I don't want her anywhere near me. That means in my garden and at my front door. She is not welcome here. I will ignore her when I see her in the street. If you can live with that, the rest of the question went unspoken. I understand, Dad. It's only until she's back on her feet again. There are other reasons I don't want Mom to live with me indefinitely. Isaac raised an eyebrow but remained silent. Tommy took a deep breath and purred, I have a boyfriend, and they're very serious. I need space and privacy, and really, we haven't gotten along since she went crazy over that jerk. I hope Mom finds a job and a place to live as soon as possible. Isaac picked up on that thought and replied, Is she still working as an accountant? Maybe I can help her with a job. She should have enough money to pay her rent. I paid almost $500,000 to get rid of her. There should be something left over from that. No, Dad, she was duped by that, and now she is completely broke. Last I heard, he had to spend his entire fortune on compensation. And yes, she's still a CPA, and since he's been in, she's also a pargal. Karma can be a. I'll try to get her a job, but don't tell her about it. I assume you're visiting her in prison? Tommy nodded affirmatively. At which point, Laura announced that dinner was ready. A few weeks later, Isaac and his daughter were chatting in the living room of the big house. He asked Tommy, When was the last time you visited your mother? I think it was shortly before I came to live here. Remember, this is your mother, you have her alone, so please keep in touch with her. You may regret it if you don't. Before Tommy could respond, there was a loud knock on the door. Isaac said, It's Fabian. He's the only one who knocks like that, and went to the door. Tommy heard the rumble with which the huge man said to Isaac, Doc, let me introduce you to my son, Julian. Hearing this, she ran out of the room to Laura. Meanwhile, Fabian continued, He makes me proud of him. Even though his father was in prison, he became a teacher. When he told me he wanted to see you, I thought I'd like to see you too. Julian, with his beet red head, stammered, It's a pleasure to meet you, sir. My father has told me a lot about you, but actually I've come to ask you something. Okay, ask away. There was a very awkward silence. Julian stared at his feet, then said quietly, In private, please. Isaac led him into the den and found that Tommy had already left. He directed Fabian's son to a chair and, sitting him down, asked, What can I do for you, Julian? Julian hurriedly mouthed, Sir, I want to ask Thomasina to marry me. We have been lovers for a long time, and I think it is time to make an honest woman of her. With your blessing, that is what I have come for, sir, to ask for your blessing. Isaac smiled from ear to ear. He called out, Thomasina Manor, I know you're listening, so come out of hiding and introduce yourself. Tommy ran into the den, smiling. Yes, Dad, this nice young man wants to marry me and asks for my blessing. Shall I give it? Yes, please, Papa, I would like that very much. Isaac rose from his chair and held out his hand. You have my blessing, son. Take good care of my daughter. It's time to celebrate. Isaac headed to follow Julian into the living room when Tommy detained him. Dad? Yes, dear? Julian doesn't know yet. I'll tell him in a minute, but right now we're in a bit of a hurry. You're going to be a grandfather in about 7 months. The doctor confirmed it this morning. Tommy, girl, you make me so happy I could burst. Do you want a double wedding with Laura and me together? That would be great. We'll discuss it later when Fabian's gone. They walked to the living room where Laura was grinning and Fabian looked completely unconcerned with what was going on. When Isaac sat down, Julian said to Fabian with a very big and happy smile, Daddy, may I introduce you to my future wife, Thomasina. Mr. Manor has just given us his blessing. May we have yours as well? Fabian's face reflected amazement. He was completely stunned. He said, Of course, if that's what you want. Isaac put his arm around him. Come on, big friend, we are now a family, and not just in one sense. Who would have thought it, huh? Across from them, Julian looked puzzled. What? Tommy said to Julian with a very happy face, Yep, you're going to be a dad. When we decided to stay together, we also decided we wanted to have kids while we were still young, so we stopped using condoms. Julian's first salvo was a direct hit. So, Mr. Small, you will have a daughter and a grandchild. 2 weeks later, Lydia sat in front of her daughter. You look amazing, Tommy. Yes, Mom, I have a place to live, and I'm going to get married. Life is treating me well. Oh, that's good. Where do you live, and when is the wedding? Tommy gave the address and enjoyed the look on her mother's face when she recognized it. It's near the house where Isaac used to live. How can you afford it? It's next to Dad's. He still lives there. I found him, and we were reunited. Lydia, despite herself, became curious. How did you find him? Just luck. His roommate's son, Laura, was a student of mine. He showed me the little robot and told me he had made it with his neighbor. When I noticed the address, I went to see what it looked like. Laura saw me following her and came out and asked me what I was doing. I explained, and a few weeks later, she and I were in touch. To answer your question, I will say that my father owns all 5 houses in this neighborhood. That's why I can afford it. Lydia fell silent, trying to comprehend the information she had received. She asked timidly, when is the wedding? We're waiting for you to get out of jail, and since you're still officially my mother, you're invited. Lydia perked up. She would see Isaac again, and he couldn't turn down his daughter's wedding. Maybe she would try to talk to him. And who knows, she asked her daughter, can I stay with you when I'm released? I have nowhere to go. The house is sold. I need a new job, too. Tommy took a deep breath. She didn't want Lydia to know that her father had already taken care of the job. She simply said, you can live with me until the baby comes. By then, I'll need a room. As for work, have you talked to XCOM Services? They specialize in helping convicts get jobs or businesses. Your baby. Are you expecting a child? Why didn't you tell me that right away? From the way you're talking to me, I think you're still mad at me. Can't you forgive me? Tommy was stunned for a moment. Was she really that stupid? She replied without holding back her anger, Mom, it's only because Dad tells me that I only have one mom and that I have to keep in touch. Otherwise, you would have seen me the last time you went to jail. You cost me more than 6 precious years of my life with Dad. And why is that? Because you were too selfish and too cowardly to do the right thing. And while we're on the subject, I talked to my dad's girlfriend a lot about everything. I really don't understand how you fell for that when you had my dad. How could you do that? It was Lydia's turn to be stunned by such an onslaught. She remained silent. It was clear to her that she was going to have to deal with serious issues with Tommy. It also came as a shock to her that Isaac had a girlfriend. She had never thought that Isaac could switch to another life so quickly after his release. She also didn't expect him to go to live in the house that had brought him so much misery, knowing that it had been trashed since she had visited there once after her breakup with Peter. She also wondered where he had gotten so much money to renovate it. When Tommy left and Lydia returned to her cell, Tommy's harsh words were still echoing in her head. She had left Peter almost immediately when it became clear that she had been played and the money had suddenly disappeared. He wanted Isaac out of the way, not only because he needed her, but because he needed a place for his smuggling activities. Lydia had tried to be a good mother to Tommy and had thought that Tommy's almost hostile attitude toward her had to do with her puberty. Now she realized how much she had hurt her girl, who seemed to be much more attached to her father than she had thought. Tommy's words had deeply wounded her soul. Lydia was angered to the core that Tommy was pregnant and hadn't told her right after she announced that she was getting married. Lydia realized that she had a very deep and wide chasm to cross before Tommy would open up to her again. Lydia sat in her room at Tommy's house. It wasn't a warm welcome, but it was a welcome. Tommy didn't hug her, but at least he said, "Welcome back, Mom. You're our guest. May I introduce you to Julian Small, my future husband and father of our child?" The introductions were made, and Tommy continued, "You are welcome to use everything in this house while you're looking for a job. You can use the laptop I put in your room. Have you contacted XCon yet?" Lydia looked down at her feet and replied, "I tried, but for some reason, they weren't interested in me. It seemed like I was banned. In fact, the whole time I was there, no one wanted anything to do with me." "I'll ask Dad. Maybe he knows why you weren't contacted," Julian remarked. "Isaac is among others who has the final say in hiring people through XCOM services. He also, on Isaac's behalf, made it clear that you would be treated respectfully and no harm would come to you. Otherwise, you would be in for a very rough ride. Isaac is highly respected." "What does your father have to do with my husband, my ex-husband, Mom?" "I know what you're thinking. Don't even try it. Dad wants nothing to do with you, nothing, you understand," Tommy interrupted her angrily, saying it more like an order than a question. Julian continued to tell the story of Isaac and Fabian. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place for Lydia. That's why it was easy for her, as easy as it could ever be. She decided to relax for a while, but deep down, she wanted her life back with Isaac. Tommy knocked and informed Lydia that she had a visitor. A startled Lydia went downstairs. A huge man stood in the hallway. Julian was tall, but this man was as tall as him and twice as wide. Gora turned around and introduced himself in a low, ringing voice. "Good afternoon. I am Fabian Small. Julian tells me you have not received a response to your request for a job." "That's right. I realized I was to be avoided like the plague by everyone," Lydia replied. "You were to be avoided." "That's right. Your association with Peter Rams puts you at risk. That's why I asked Isaac to speak out on the matter. He felt a responsibility. He was responsible for the evidence that eventually led to your imprisonment. When Rams found out who had delivered the evidence to bring about his ultimate demise, he started threatening you and my future daughter-in-law. So we had to put you in some sort of isolation. Now I hear that you are looking for work. Is that correct?" "Yes, I was a CPA and worked as a paralegal until we were both arrested." "Paralegal accountant. Good, good. I run a company that provides security services and security systems. My company, in trust, is Bexon Investments. Needs an accountant. I can offer you a decent salary. We hire you for a month, after which, if you prove capable and compatible with our staff, you will be given a certain contract, and we will provide you with accommodation rent-free. There is one condition: under no circumstances are you to attempt to contact Isaac. I am your immediate supervisor. Can you agree to that?" "I have no choice, do I?" "I agree." "Of course, you have a choice. You can refuse." Lydia was silent for a moment. She was shocked at how much Isaac had shut her out, even though he cared about her immediate needs. She asked Fabian about it. "The answer is simple. We try to provide for all former prisoners. The only exception is that Isaac will have nothing to do with you, for obvious reasons." Lydia was shocked again, this time from the direct, almost hostile answer. She said, with a tremor in her voice, "I agree to the demands." Fabian didn't expect anything else, so he said, "Good. Tomorrow, Julian will drop you off at our office to sign your contracts and go through the human resources process. We will arrange for a small rental car for you. We have a garage on hand that can provide employees with a decent car for a reasonable price, but that's all for next month." With that, Fabian said goodbye and walked away, leaving a confused Lydia behind. She got up and was about to go to her room again when suddenly she saw the binoculars. She looked up and saw that just at that time, Fabian came to the door of Isaac's house and was greeted by her ex-husband. She didn't have enough time to get a proper look at Isaac. However, she placed the binoculars next to the window. She began to make a list of requirements to give her life a fresh start. It was almost dark when Lydia heard the sound of a car pulling up the street. Tommy and Julian were having dinner at a restaurant, so they wouldn't be home anytime soon. Looking out the window, she saw that the car had stopped in front of Isaac's door. She saw Isaac get out of the car and then saw a very pregnant woman with light brown curly hair hugging her ex-husband. Even through the binoculars, she could see sparks popping between them. She envied this woman and felt terribly jealous, angry, and lost at the same time. This should be her man in her house. It was some time before she came to her senses. After all, she was the reason why that woman was standing on the porch in the light of the lantern, not herself. Despairing, she sat down. Lydia realized what she had done was terribly foolish, but surely there must be a way to get back into Isaac's heart. With only 2 weeks until Tommy's wedding, Lydia tried to find as much information about Isaac as she could. The binoculars helped. She could see Isaac's face, his graying hair, his straight posture, and slender body. She could see him interacting with the boy, Timothy, wasn't it? She couldn't help herself and felt the prick of envy again. Isaac was so good with children. She tried to elicit from Tommy about Isaac's pregnant mistress, but was constantly rebuffed. Neither Tommy, Julian, nor Fabian responded to her inquiries. There were no direct answers to her questions either. The day before Tommy's wedding, she was informed that Isaac and Laura were also getting married, and Lydia was shocked. She had been invited to Tommy's wedding and couldn't refuse, but the thought of having to witness her ex-husband's wedding was a direct blow to her ego. She felt devastated. All her hopes of reuniting with Isaac were gone. That was pregnant with Isaac's child. Why hadn't she thought of that? She felt like such a fool. Lydia turned and gave final instructions to the movers who were hauling her belongings away to the house provided to her by Beckon. Isaac had made an exception for Lydia to attend the wedding and an after-party at his and Laura's home. There was dinner, and after dinner, there was a band and dancing. The dinner was held in a friendly atmosphere, the food was exceptional, and Lydia was seated between 2 young men who animatedly discussed music and theater with her. When the dancing began, Lydia sat in a corner, lost and dejected, and watched the festivities. She noticed that hardly any alcohol was consumed and was surprised by it. The traditional dances began, the bride and groom, the father of the bride with the bride, the mother of the bride with. She saw Julian looking at Isaac, who only nodded imperceptibly. Julian turned and walked over to Lydia. "Ma'am, would you do me the honor of dancing this dance?" asked Julian politely. Lydia stood up, accepted Julian's hand, and walked out onto the dance floor. She felt uplifted as they danced. She loved to dance, but hadn't done so in years, and Julian was a good dancer. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed Tommy and Laura talking to Isaac, who was nodding but looked concerned. The dance with Julian was over, and she was about to crawl back into her corner when she suddenly felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned and looked up into Isaac's face. It was then, up close, that she noticed his eyes, wrinkled deep and sad, that had seen a lot of suffering. My God, what's happened to him, she thought. And then it hit her. It's me. I'm the one who happened to him. I'm such a... Suddenly, she didn't understand herself. How could she look at herself in the mirror? In a fit of madness, she had put this man through hell and had the nerve to be jealous that he had escaped the hell she had created. Within seconds, she lost all self-esteem and confidence, physically shuddering at the thought of what she had done to this man. Then, she realized Isaac was holding out his hand, waiting patiently as her thoughts swirled in her head and bombarded her. "I'm sorry, are you asking me?" she asked in a small, timid voice. Isaac repeated, "Will you honor me, Lydia, by doing this dance?" Without another word, Lydia clung to Isaac and sobbed. Not long after the dance began, she regained her composure. Gathering all her remaining courage, she whispered, choking back tears, "Isaac, I'm so sorry for what I did to you. I know you must hate me now. I'm sorry I can't give you your years back." Isaac replied, "Lydia, I'm glad you're remorseful. But we are dancing because the 2 women I love most in the world have asked me to show you compassion. I did for you a little of what you did for me at one time, and you felt a little of the pain I felt. I say a little, Ram's words, you will tell him the rules and deal with it or else, and subsequent betrayal seared my soul. I hated you until I met Laura. She filled the void with her love, and all feelings for you evaporated. We dance here as strangers with a shared past. I will no longer avoid you because of our daughter and soon-to-be grandchild, but it will be a long time before I can call you a friend. Mind you, I have 2 gatekeepers who will be watching you like hawks with very sharp claws that they will not be afraid to use if you try to do anything in their opinion inappropriate to me. Now, let's enjoy the dance together." Lydia almost inhaled the touch of the man she had once forgotten she loved. He felt different. Whereas before he had been a little soft to the touch, now his shoulders seemed bony and hard. His gait and movements betrayed strength and endurance. She remembered how capable he'd been between the sheets and marveled again at her own stupidity. Now she had paid a price for it, a terribly steep and terrible price. Instead of helping her daughter on the most beautiful day of her life, she was barely tolerated as a guest. Her father's fiancée was instead acting as her daughter's mother. They were so close. Lydia observed Julian's invitation to dance, an action that should have felt natural, but instead, it hung upon Isaac's approval. Her daughter and his wife had to coax Isaac out of his reluctance. As she danced, a wave of desolation engulfed her like the onset of nightfall in a gorge, starkly defined and inescapable, signaling a cold, lonely night ahead. Trembling, she sought solace in the arms of the man she had betrayed and lost. Within Isaac's embrace, she mourned the loss of all she had forsaken. Isaac witnessed Lydia's transformation from a confident and beautiful woman to one shattered and insecure. He was finished with her. She would now have to fight for her redemption, just as he had. Gently, he murmured in her ear, "There are people who will stand by you and offer assistance. I've given you the essentials. The rest is up to you." As the dance concluded, Tommy approached Lydia, sensing the emotional turmoil she was experiencing. "This has been incredibly intense for you. Would you like to stay the night? I don't think you should drive right now. I couldn't bear to lose my mom. Or should I arrange for someone to drive you home?" Accepting Tommy's offer for a ride to her new residence, Lydia accompanied Ben and Anna. Before they reached her destination, Anna turned to Lydia from the front seat and spoke frankly, "You're facing solitude and alienation. You've made mistakes, and you'll bear the consequences for a long time. Tonight, you finally grasped the extent of the harm you inflicted on Isaac. Rather than endure the inconvenience and face the fallout, that was Isaac's objective. He's effectively dismantled Rams. That man will endure a tormenting time in prison, and not in a positive manner. But Isaac won't deprive his daughter of a stable mother. Therefore, on Isaac's behalf, we're offering you counseling. It will aid you in comprehending why you veered off course and how to cope with the repercussions. Just think it over, and if you agree, inform Fabian." Upon arriving home, Lydia stepped into the dimly lit house, shedding her coat as she collapsed onto the sofa. In the darkness, she finally released her emotions, weeping as remorse and profound loss consumed her. It was all her doing. Isaac had suffered, yet he had moved forward, finding new joy. Now, it was her turn to strive for the same.